If you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling drained, frustrated, or quietly angry at yourself, this video is for you. Not because you're weak, not because you don't know better, but because somewhere along the way, you learned that keeping the peace was safer than enforcing respect. You learned to let things slide, to explain instead of stand firm, to tolerate behavior that never sat right in your gut. And over time, that became your default. Most men don't realize they're being disrespected in one dramatic moment. It happens slowly. Small comments you brush off. Boundaries you don't reinforce. Situations where you tell yourself, it's not worth the conflict. Until one day you look around and realize people feel comfortable taking from you, crossing lines with you, and assuming you'll always stay. Not because they're evil, but because you trained them that you would. This isn't about becoming aggressive, cold, or hostile. And it's not about blaming women, friends, family, or the world. This is about understanding the psychology behind why people push as far as you let them, and why good intentions without consequences quietly destroy your leverage. In this video, we're going to break down why you let people get away with too much, how it starts, what it costs you, and what actually changes when you stop explaining and start enforcing. Because the truth is simple, even if it's uncomfortable. Respect doesn't come from how much you give. It comes from what you're willing to walk away from. Most men don't wake up one day and decide, I'm going to let people walk over me. This pattern starts quietly, almost invisibly, and usually with good intentions. You want harmony. You want to be understood. You want things to work. So the first time someone crosses a line, you explain instead of enforce. You give the benefit of the doubt. You assume they didn't mean it like that. And in that moment, nothing seems wrong. But psychology doesn't work in single moments. It works in patterns. The moment you tolerate something once, you've set a reference point. Not just for them, but for yourself. Your nervous system learns that discomfort is something you should swallow instead of act on. You start prioritizing emotional safety over self-respect, without even realizing that's what you're doing. This is why people who mean well often get disrespected the most. You communicate clearly, you're patient, you're emotionally available. And because there are no consequences attached to boundary violations, others slowly learn that your limits are flexible, that your words don't carry weight, that you'll stay even when you're unhappy. What makes this dangerous is that it doesn't feel like weakness in the moment. It feels like maturity. It feels like being the bigger person. But over time, that restraint turns into resentment. You start feeling unseen, taken for granted, slightly angry at yourself for allowing situations you don't actually agree with. And here's the part most men miss. People don't keep pushing because they're cruel. They keep pushing because the system allows it. When boundaries aren't enforced, they stop being boundaries and become suggestions. And once that happens, respect quietly drains out of the dynamic without a single argument ever happening. This is how men end up over-explaining, over-giving, and over-tolerating. Not because they lack strength, but because they were never taught that calm enforcement matters more than good intentions. Once this pattern is set, it stops being a conscious decision and starts becoming automatic. Your nervous system begins to associate boundary enforcement with risk, conflict, rejection, abandonment, escalation. So instead of responding directly, your body chooses the option that feels safest in the moment. Suppression. You feel the irritation, the disappointment, the quiet anger, and you swallow it. This is where men get stuck. Not because they don't know something is wrong, but because their system has learned that speaking up costs too much. Somewhere along the line, you learned that asserting yourself led to punishment. Maybe arguments that went nowhere, maybe being gaslit, maybe being made to feel like the problem. So your system adapts. It keeps the peace externally by creating tension internally. Over time, this rewires your behavior. You hesitate before addressing disrespect. You second-guess your reactions. You ask yourself if you're overreacting, and that hesitation is felt immediately by other people. Not logically, instinctively. Humans sense when someone is unsure of their own limits, and they adjust accordingly. This is why simply being more confident doesn't work. Confidence isn't a mindset. It's a signal sent by a regulated nervous system. When your system is calm and grounded, enforcement feels natural. Your voice doesn't shake. You don't over-explain. You don't bargain for respect. You state, act, and move on. But when your system is dysregulated, you either explode after long suppression or disappear into silence and resentment. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Every time you let something slide to avoid discomfort, you train your body to expect more of the same. The threshold moves. What once felt unacceptable becomes normal. What once bothered you deeply becomes just how it is. And eventually, you look around and realize you're living inside dynamics you don't recognize as your own. This is why men who let too much go often feel exhausted rather than angry. The cost isn't the other person's behavior. It's the constant internal regulation required to stay quiet. And until that pattern is interrupted, respect can't return, because enforcement never arrives. Here's what most men miss. People don't push boundaries because they're evil. They push them because nothing stops them. Behavior is shaped by feedback, not intentions. When disrespect, inconsistency, or manipulation isn't met with consequence, it doesn't register as wrong. It registers as allowed. Every time you excuse behavior you don't like, you send a silent signal. This is tolerable. Not because you said it out loud, but because you stayed. You kept engaging. You kept explaining. You kept trying to restore harmony instead of restoring order. And humans learn fast. They notice what costs them something and what doesn't. This is why respect doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes gradually. One ignored comment, one crossed line, one moment where you should have stepped back but chose to smooth things over instead. Each time, the dynamic shifts slightly. The other person becomes more comfortable doing less, pushing more, and giving you less consideration. Not out of malice, but because the environment rewards it. And here's the brutal part. People often don't realize they're disrespecting you until you stop tolerating it. In their mind, they're just behaving the way they've been allowed to behave. The moment you change your response, by withdrawing attention, enforcing space, or walking away without drama, confusion appears. Not because you changed, but because the rules did. This is why talking rarely fixes these dynamics. Explanations don't reset patterns. Consequences do. Not punishment, not anger, just removal. Reduced access, less emotional availability, clear distance. Behavior adjusts when comfort is threatened, not when logic is presented. Men who command respect aren't loud or aggressive. They're predictable in one way. If something crosses their line, they act. Calmly, cleanly, without negotiation. That consistency teaches others how to treat them far more effectively than any speech ever could. And once you understand this, you stop asking, "Why do they keep doing this to me?" You start asking, "Why am I still here when they do?" There's a reason men who give the most often get respected the least. And it's not because generosity is wrong. It's because unbalanced generosity teaches dependency, not appreciation. When you constantly absorb discomfort, smooth over tension, or overfunction to keep relationships stable, you slowly train people to rely on your tolerance instead of respecting your limits. Overgiving often comes from a good place. You want peace. You want things to work. You want to be the bigger man. But when that instinct isn't paired with boundaries, it turns into self-abandonment. You start doing emotional labor for everyone else while no one carries any for you. And over time, that creates resentment on your side and entitlement on theirs. The trap is subtle. You tell yourself you're being patient, understanding, mature. But what's really happening is that you're delaying discomfort in the short term at the cost of long-term respect. You keep hoping people will eventually get it, realize your value, or change on their own. Most don't. Not because they're bad people, but because there's no pressure to evolve. This is where many men confuse kindness with passivity. Kindness without standards becomes a liability. It signals that you'll stay even when unhappy, that you'll keep giving even when depleted, that your presence doesn't require mutual effort. And when people sense that, they unconsciously take more and give less. Not intentionally, instinctively. The moment you stop overgiving, the dynamic shifts. Some people step up, others step away. Both outcomes are information. The ones who rise were capable all along. The ones who disappear were benefiting from your lack of limits. Either way, clarity replaces confusion. A man who respects himself doesn't need to announce his boundaries. He simply changes his behavior when they're crossed. He gives where there's reciprocity. He withdraws where there isn't. And he understands this truth. You don't teach people how to treat you by what you say. You teach them by what you tolerate. Once you internalize that, you stop leaking energy trying to be understood. You start conserving it for people and situations that actually deserve access to you. The moment you stop letting things slide just to keep the peace, your life starts to recalibrate. Not because you became harsh or selfish, but because you finally became clear. Clear about what you accept. Clear about what you give. Clear about when it's time to step back instead of bending again. This isn't about pushing people away. It's about no longer betraying yourself to keep others comfortable. When you stop overextending, stop excusing disrespect, and stop carrying what isn't yours to carry, something important happens. The right people adjust, and the wrong ones remove themselves. Both outcomes protect you. If this video put words to something you've been feeling but couldn't quite explain, that's not an accident. Growth often starts with awareness, and awareness turns into power when you act on it. If you're learning how to set boundaries without guilt, walk away without chaos, and build a life where your energy is respected, like the video, comment your takeaway, and subscribe. This is where self-respect stops being theory and starts becoming how you live.